Hello to everybody that's watching at the moment. We're here today with another episode of the Friday Book Club, or Carteadevineri. And we have a special guest coming in for the first time on with the Romanian Diaspora. We have Rupert Wolfe Murray, who's one of the authors writing a book about Romania. So with me, Andra.
Hello.
And I will let Rupert to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about who he is and why does he write books about Romania.
Hi. Nice to meet you all. And I'd say I have written a book about Romania. It's just published now, 1st of June. And why I wrote about it and why, I first went to Romania in 1986, actually, and really hated it because people were so unfriendly, and went back as a journalist in 1990 and found everybody really friendly and open, and then loved it ever since. And basically spent 17 years there doing journalism, charity work, then EU consultancy, and PR work, all kinds of different stuff. I learned the language and, learned to love Romania and not hate it, but kind of got annoyed by certain things. So my book, I think, is my book, Romania Rude and Vile, is supposedly, I aim to give foreigners a useful supplement to their guidebook and anything else they've read about Romania. And I aim to give Romanians a foreigner's perspective of their country, unsentimental, but sympathetic, but also critical.
Sounds good to me. I think we've got a couple of questions. Maybe, Andra, you want to go with the first one?
Okay, thanks. I'll take the first one then. So the first question is about the link between Scotland and Romania. Is there one, do you have a particular link in mind, or is there anything you discovered whilst you were writing the book?
Well, funnily enough, that I just remembered this story I heard in Romania, which I didn't put in the book, but it reminds me of this link where somebody told me in Romania that Hadrian, when he was emperor of Romania, had been in Scotland, and we have Hadrian's Wall separating the English and the Scottish. And this guy was telling me that, oh yeah, lots of Romanians were in Scotland. He was talking like he'd been there himself with the Roman army. And I just found that wonderful story because personally, I have found loads of connections between Scotland and Britain and Romania. Like, I've always felt that we've both considered ourselves slightly outside the EU, the European kind of heartland, and so well, you know how Britain's actually left the EU now, and for a long time, I think Romanians talked about joining Europe as if it's this great thing that's going to happen. It's going to as if we're not in it yet, even though you're so obviously part of Europe because you're part of the geography. But I think that kind of distance from Europe is something in common. And also we both have this kind of craziness that, like, I've always thought the Romanians are the most friendly country in Europe, and visitors to Britain always say, oh, Scotland's the most friendly part of Britain, which I don't particularly agree with, but that's what people tell me. And the other thing actually is that when I tell Romanians that you're the most friendly country, they go, what? Us friendly? We're not friendly, we're horrible. That's what they tell me, but they've always been friendly with me over 17 years. It's been amazing.
So it's from one side, one extreme to the other, essentially, of Europe. Yeah. And it's
exactly,
different perspectives.
That's totally true. Yeah, you're against the Black Sea, we're against the North Sea and the Atlantic. And it's like, yeah, I mean, because you could argue that Romania is the end of Europe, because beyond that is Georgia and Turkey and stuff, and the Asia bits start, Middle East. Well, I don't think the Georgians would like that, but you could argue that.
True.
Thank you very much. It's funny that you should mention the Romanians in Scotland, because Sorina and I have a little ace up our sleeve that we haven't
Mm.
spoken about yet. We're in touch with the lady who has published the book and done a research on the Dacians on Hadrian's Wall.
Oh,
So that's hopefully something that's going to come up later in the year. We're still talking about the format and how we're going to present it. But it's nice to hear that it's not just a very specialized knowledge, that people have heard about it and are interested and intrigued to hear about the Romanians in Scotland hundreds and hundreds of years ago. My next question is about the process of writing the book, because one thing we haven't said is that the book is actually a collection of articles that you've written mostly when you were living in Romania a while ago, and which you have reviewed and reassessed for publishing, if I understand it correctly.
correct.
During this process of, writing the first series of articles and then rereading them for this book and all of the other changes over the years, you've already spoken about how your perception of friendliness of Romanians has changed. What has changed the most in your perception of Romania as part of writing this book? What is the one aspect that has shifted considerably?
Probably I'd say the thing that's changed the most, covering the period, basically the period of the book is basically from 1990 to the present. And during that period, during the early 1990s, I lived in a village in Botoșani and really experienced the true Romanian village life and really loved it, actually. I mean, for instance, they would get married every weekend and invite us along, and then the local lads would help each other building houses, and there was a real kind of community thing there. And now that's really changed in the sense that the villages have been emptied with emigration, and they're kind of dead, and in many ways. And so I think that's the biggest change I've seen, the saddest change. I remember having this idea that if it could be set up somehow, I can just imagine like Westerners. I know so many people in Scotland and all over the place who would love to go and live in not a big, but a spacious one of those village houses in Romania, with lots of land around and beautiful weather in the summer and harsh winters, and on a British or German pension, they could go and live there. I mean, it's obviously a very impractical idea because of so many reasons, but I just love that idea. Like, you guys come over here and live here, we go and live there. A lot of people love that idea, because another thing about Scotland is that they hate the weather. The weather's always what we call drich, which means miserable. And people just love a bit of hot weather. So yeah, anyway, that's the biggest change I think I've seen. And obviously there's a massive changes on every time I go back there. Things seem to have progressed in terms of technology and logistics and vehicles and facilities in the big cities, but somehow I don't really consider that a very important change, because it's kind of, those things are just kind of things that you buy. The people in some ways haven't changed at all.
So you're clearly feeling the let's say the conservative side of Romanians, and the mindset is still very much conservative and kind of set in their ways in some respect, maybe.
Certainly the older generations, yeah. And I brought up 2 kids in Romania, so my kids are now 20 and 23, and they grew up in Romania for half their life, and then they moved to England for the latter half. And so I was hanging out with kids and parents a lot, and I think the way that they bring up the kids, I don't really like that, because they're very, in my experience, they're very controlling and over anxious about things. Whereas I understand under communism that kids were much more free, funnily enough. A bit like what happened here in Britain. In Scotland, we've got helicopter parenting, and people are really neurotic about kids. But when I was a kid, we were completely left to our own devices. And I think that's true across the board, and that's something I feel quite sad about.
Fair enough. I think that speaks more of the times than necessarily of a specific country. Going back to the book, I think you're in the process of publishing an actual written version of the book, and you were looking at potentially creating a little bit of differentiation with the online version. Are there any particular things that you're considering in terms of what you want to potentially rewrite or reframe for the paper?
No, actually, the paperback. So I've got 3 versions. I've got the ebook, paperback version, and hardback, and they're all the same. They're basically all the same. And I was really quite excited by the idea of doing a hardback on Amazon, because it's a very new thing. Obviously, it's much more expensive. That's about £14, and the book's about £6. Actually, I was just doing the price of the paperback book, and I did this. How do you make a price? I wrote this on Facebook today. How do you make a price? And obviously, there's all businesses have all this scientific and clever technology methodology, and how they make prices, and it's all very clever. And I just remember this thing my kids used to say in Romania, which was, "Why is 6 afraid of 7?" Do you know that? No, because 7, 8, 9. So that was the price I put, was 7.89. I always make up these prices kind of based on some random idea. But you mentioned the articles earlier, and there's an interesting thing there, because initially, I don't know if you read my afterword, but I thought I could knock this together in a few days. I just thought, well, I've got 60 articles from Romania. Just go through them, pick the best ones, shove it in a document, write a couple of pages intro, POF team, what could possibly go wrong? That was about 4 years ago. And it took me, I don't know how many months of really hard work to go through these articles and realize that most of them were actually rubbish. And out of those 60 articles that I wrote, I only chose 16 for the book. And the rest of them were either repetitions or not particularly relevant. So I was really selective and really, and then there was gaps. And then I wrote 2 or 3 big new articles for the book. And then spent ages juggling around the running order so that it flowed together, And then I had it finished, and then I showed it to various people who had lots of feedback. And my daughter in particular, who, as I said, grew up in Romania and is a superb editor. And she had loads of feedback, and very critical, actually. And that, so when I was in Romania this March, I spent a month basically putting in her very detailed feedback and making the book a lot better and bringing it a bit up to date. Some of these articles are very old, which is fine, but I just so needed to update it. And then when the article was changing a lot, I would add an afterword and add a kind of, for example, I've got one called First Impressions of Bucharest, and it's quite a nasty article in a way. It's very critical of Bucharest in the 90s. And she said, "This is ridiculous. You can't write." And rather than change it completely, I added an afterword to say, "Well, yeah, McDonald's is no longer in the underground station at Universitate, and things, the parking situation is much better. A lot of things are much." But I kept the article there because it showed how I felt about Romania in the 90s. And it showed a kind of portrait of that city then, when it was more chaotic.
Yep. And I think that's a really important point of view in a time in history. And it's a really nice comparison of before and after, or now and then.
And then the other bit of feedback I was getting from people was, "But this is such an old stuff. It's like so out of date." And I said, "Well, yeah, but it's going to be out of date anyway. If I write an up-to-date piece about Romania, it will be out of date in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So why not just be honest about it and say at the beginning, it's not, it's not new, it's old stuff." So it gives you a glimpse of a time of Romania from 1990 to, well, it would be, say, 2020. And I'm not trying to be super up to date, like a guidebook or some political thing.
Yep.
Thank you. When you were writing the book and when you were publishing it and planning it, what were you hoping would be its impact in the UK, and what were you hoping its impact would be in Romania, if you had considered it that far?
Oh, I had, yeah. So basically, I was really hoping to impact, I am hoping to impact the people, the British and Western people who want to go to Romania and looking online for something to read that's kind of a bit different, because I give like lots of different perspectives on Romania. For example, I met someone today who wants to go and visit Romania as a tourist, and somebody else said, "Oh, you want to go to Romania? You need a car. It's really difficult to get around. Don't go." And I said, "Look, I've got this book which shows the good side and the bad side, and just read my book, and then it might help you decide whether to go or not." And then many Romanians have told me that they really like to read the perspectives of foreigners, and that's another big reason why I wrote it, was that I made so many great Romanian friends in Romania over the years, and there's been so many amazing people I've met who I think would appreciate this, and so I really hope to have an impact, and then obviously the title I've chosen is quite a provocative one, which some people get quite offended by, and they said, why do you call Romania rude and vile? I said, well, I'm not actually saying that. And I got some nasty feedback online about this. And the guy said, oh, I'm not going to read your book. But if he had read my book, he'd have realized that generally my approach is very sympathetic. And I don't know if you remember that thing I wrote where I was involved with an ad agency that was coming up with all these ideas about promoting Romania, and they were all super positive. And I said, but you've got to address the fact that Romania has a negative image abroad. So you have to address that issue before you can get to the positive. So that's why I thought I call this contrast, a negative title will hopefully attract people to look at it, at least open it and look at it a bit, and then realize this is quite interesting. And the feedback I've been getting, people actually read it, is really, really good.
It's actually quite a clever play on words that both Andra and myself were saying. How is it possible that both of us have studied English for a long time and we've actually never clicked on the words being written in the same way and meaning a completely different thing. I'm not gonna say it, of course. But yeah, if you're into words and play on words, then definitely the book has some hidden gems in there for you. And talking about words, I think you're also mentioning that in your journey through Romania, one of the reasons and one of the purposes of you being there is journalism. So if you were to compare Scottish or British journalists to Romanian journalists, what would stand out? What's the difference and what's the commonality, I suppose?
Wow, it's a really
from your experience, obviously.
Really interesting question, because I was only a journalist there for a couple of years in the early 90s. In fact, not even. I was only a journalist there for about less than a year, in 1990 actually. And then and the reason I dropped out of journalism was because my newspaper, the Scotland on Sunday and Scotsman, they said, oh, the public are no longer interested in Romania unless you write about AIDS babies and the orphanage story. And I thought, well, no, I'm not going to do that, because it's like, it feels really exploitative to go and kind of prey on really suffering children having a terrible time, and then get photos and do all this horrible journalism. That's the sort of journalism I never wanted to get into, and I didn't. I got into aid work instead, to help these kids rather than exploit them. And but I had learned, by that time I had learned the skills. And funnily enough, people always call me a journalist, even though I always say I'm not a journalist. I was a journalist way back 30 years ago. But I used these skills not only to write articles, but to do PR, because I became a PR consultant eventually. And having some, well, I wouldn't call it training, but having some experience in journalism really helped me communicate. really helped me do PR. But your question, comparison between Scottish and Romanian journalists, that's a really, really interesting question, because I think they're both as bad as each other, because journalism in general is in a terrible state around the world because of the, well, mainly because of the internet, isn't it? And the whole economy of the newspapers has gone down the drain, and it's just, and then social media's, you know, put a rocket through it, and it's just all over the place. And unfortunately, Romania's gone from, well, you could say gone from the frying pan into the fire, because the journalism you had under communism wasn't great. It was, I remember the articles in the early 90s, which just, I couldn't understand a word what was going on. It was more like philosophy than journalism. And then you kind of adopted our really rotten model of, you know, making the whole thing into a really competitive business and very sensational. And it's probably even more, I mean, we've got terrible sensationalist press in Britain. The TV tends to be a bit more sensible, whereas maybe in Romania, the TV is a bit more crazy and the paper's a bit more, I don't know, but I think the press in both countries is basically a mess. But obviously there's some great stuff going on, like Dor, and people seem to think that channel Recorder is very good. So I guess in both places, the media has the opportunity to do something cool on the internet. But I've been out of it for a long time, and you know, and I don't even think those, I mean, I don't really consider them articles anymore, those stories in my book, because I kind of adapted them to the book and made them more into stories, into sort of long form. I guess in Dor they call them long form articles, but
yeah, that's correct. So it's more of a stroll down memory lane of a then and now type of situation. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the chapters in your book is specifically about the best travel books to take to Romania. And you start off by saying, what is your ideal travel book and why? Other than yours, what is the best travel book about Romania?
Actually, I've got two reactions. My first one is, I don't even know a good travel book about Romania, except the one I mentioned called Journey to Kars, Kars. But he's traveling all the way to Kars in Turkey, so it barely covers Romania and is not very nice about Romania. But I can't really think of any good travel books about Romania. But the book that I always recommend people is the one Athene Palas, written in about 1940 by that German-American woman, because it's a historical story about a very interesting time, and it's what a lot of people over here read, that Balkan trilogy books, which is by Olivia Manning. I just think they're a bit boring, and that one, Athena Palas, is an amazing book. And the other book that people recommend, and I actually got mentioned in, but I haven't actually read it to my shame, is that one, Along the Enchanted Way. Everybody thinks that's amazing, and so I'd probably recommend that if I had to. But travel books, I honestly can't think of any.
We've actually put Along the Enchanted Way as one of our recommendations, I think, last autumn. Yeah. Athene Palas, is that by the Countess Waldeck?
Exactly. That's it. Yeah. I didn't know she was a countess. She was a journalist. She was a AP journalist.
Well, one of the editions that I found on Goodreads is listed as Comtesse R.G. Waldeck.
Yeah, probably. And what was really interesting was that she was actually a German Jew, and she emigrated to America in the 30s and got naturalized. So she came from America to Romania as an American journalist for AP. So she would go and interview the German commanders and talk to them on equal terms, and talk to the different commanders in the Romanian government, the people in the Athena Palace and the spies and everybody. And what was amazing is that the Germans had no idea, or they couldn't do anything about the fact that she was Jewish.
Amazing. And there's quite a number of minorities in Romania that many people don't seem to either take into account or want to necessarily discuss. Also, one of
Yeah,
the
definitely.
communism legacies of a single identity. But having said that, for somebody who's never really been to Romania, and hears about it today, what would be like your top 3 or top 5 places that you would say go and start from there?
Oh, I always say go to the center of the country. I'd say probably Sibiu, Brasov, Cluj. Those 3 come to mind, and also Timișoara and Iași. I think are great cities. Iași is very underrated and really brilliant, and Bucharest. I mean, people are. Yeah, I think that makes up 5, or it should.
Yeah, definitely.
And
My
and
lit
the
teacher will be very, very pleased and happy to hear you recommend Yash, because that's her native town. So,
yeah, it's great. Iași is an amazing place. And
Stunning.
funny enough, I went vegan a few years back, and when I was traveling in Romania with my son, he persuaded me to do it. And I went to Iași soon after and looked up on this app called Happy Cow, which is all the vegan restaurants. And I found a couple of really amazing vegan places in Iași, just so interesting, these places. And every time I go to Iași, it's really interesting. Funnily enough, I've just been approached by a publishing company from Iași, a new publishing company called Alice Books, and they've offered me a contract to translate and publish my book in Romanian.
very nice.
Yeah,
Fabulous.
it's a new publishing company from somebody who used to work at, what was that big company in Iași? Not Humanitas, the other one. The big publisher in Iași.
Polirom.
Polirom, yeah.
That sounds
Well,
fantastic.
let
Yeah.
us know how that goes, and we'll
Yeah.
happily do another recording or even a live
Okay,
interview
great, great.
to launch
Yeah.
that one into the ether.
And
I'm going to be
I,
a really sorry. Go
yeah.
on.
No, and I was saying to her, the other thing I was kind of I guess it's the journalist in me, the kind of sensationalist in me, is kind of half hoping to cause a bit of scandal with this title, because some people get really upset by the title and just look at the title and say, oh my God, he's insulting us. How could you? How dare you? And I can see that becoming a kind of thing on the media or social media, the more nationalist types getting really insulted, and then people saying, well, it's not quite like that, by the way. And that could be a kind of publicity thing.
Yep, it's a good stunt, and I think you've got it spot on. One last.
Actually,
go
sorry,
on,
Sorina.
go on, Andra.
There's a surprise question,
Yeah, go ahead.
and it's for you.
Okay.
I'm going to turn the tables on you, Sorina,
Why?
because you were actually one of the people who's credited in this book.
Okay. I just helped, so I'm enjoying the kind of proofreading role that Rupert kindly offered, just because it was interesting. First of all, from my own curiosity to get my hands on a manuscript is quite an intimate thing, and I appreciate the trust. But other than that, I have absolutely no credit in this. The work is his, and it's absolutely
No,
fantastic.
that's not true, because not only did you give me feedback on the proofreading level, but it was really important, your feedback, because I wrote this thing with this potentially offensive title, and I really wanted a couple of Romanians to read it and just tell me that I'm not completely insane, and this isn't ridiculous and boring, and that's why I mentioned you, and also a really good friend called Roxana Morea, Bucharest, who also read it and gave me a wonderful little quote I used in the blurb, actually. Again, I mentioned you two and my daughter, and who else? Oh yeah, an American guy who'd lived in Romania for a while, now in Hungary, and then this guy, a German guy who basically lent me the apartment in March where I could actually do the editing. Those are the people I've credited, because all of you got and I wouldn't have put your name there if it was just if you hadn't done nothing. It's ridiculous to say that.
No,
mean,
but I mean, it's your
I would say
word.
actually, you gave me the confidence. Actually, that's what I'd say. You gave me the confidence to go ahead, because if you ignored me, there was another Romanian, funnily enough, I sent, who said she wanted to read it, a Romanian in London, and I sent it to her. She never replied. So if you'd never replied, and Roxana had never replied, I probably wouldn't have gone ahead.
Well, that's a wonderful thing to hear. So happy to have helped you. From my perspective, it's a different point of view. So I feel that everything in life is built up of different perspectives, like some sort of a prism. So if you look at it from a different angle, you will have a completely different picture. So every time that we visited Romania, and we've done that now twice with a group of friends who are from a different country, I've always looked for their point of view on places that I know, that I've visited before, simply because it enriches the entire experience. So, for example, my husband, who's still very much learning Romanian nowadays, knows one word very well, because in English you say cut the bread, yeah, cut it. In Romanian, if you put the two words together, you have cuțit, which is knife.
Oh.
So what's the purpose of a knife? Well, to cut whatever.
Yeah.
Again, I looked at that word forever. It never dawned on me.
And I just realized another word that's quite funny in that context is, you say Thai, don't you? Thai pina?
Yep.
And I just realized Thai in English is something you could, and I like to do comedy with them, and I say Thai, yeah. So how do you cut the bread, and do a thing of a tie, around the neck, and mess around with people, because that's how I learn languages. Is I get in like I'm hitchhiking or something with some people who don't speak English, and I get hold of one word and I say it all wrong. They have a laugh. They say, and some miscommunication and crazy stuff's going on, and it's all a big joke and it's fun. And I remember those words.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about perspectives, you mentioned earlier the way that you are kind of thinking about your pricing. There's clearly not a thought about profit margins and return on investments, or whatever other people may be considering when they're defining their prices. What's your ethos? If you were to say, this defines Rupert, what would that be?
Well, I think now in the last few years, my new ethos actually is just helping. I want to help people. Whereas if I think back when I started writing, like when I got back from Tibet in '89, and then wrote a manuscript about Tibet, which became the book. 20 years later, it became 9 Months in Tibet. So when I first wrote that book, I had these illusions of grandeur and thought, such a great story. I'm going to make $1 million here. And I don't know how I'm going to spend that money. And I was fantasizing about how to spend this huge amount of money I was bound to get, because how couldn't I get it? Such a great story. And then the agent who'd actually asked me to write the book said, actually, we don't want to deal with it. It's not good enough. And I was shattered, but I carried on anyway, doing that, and then got involved in other stuff, all this journalism and aid work and all the stuff I ended up doing. And it was only 20 years later, after I got divorced, that I rewrote that book. But by this time, I got to the point where I said a really liberating thing, saying, actually, I realize I'm not going to get rich and famous, and actually don't care if I make any money. And now my whole approach to books is just get the thing out there, And if nobody buys it, no big deal, because so many people have written these manuscripts and they sit on them and don't publish them because of self-doubt, because they can't find a publisher. And that's why I really like self-publishing on Amazon, because it gives you a lot of the tools of publishing. I mean, global distribution, for example. And I mean, it's amazing. It's simple too, it's a simple process. And I say to people who've written books, just get the thing out there. It doesn't matter if no one reads it. It's just, it's so much better to be on Amazon than in your cupboard. So I think, and I think that fits my ethos of just helping people. And that's my motive this year. I'm doing this book, 12 Jobs in 12 Months. That's my next book, actually, for next year. And so every month I'm doing a different job. And with the ethos that I'm helping people. So in August, I'm going to go to Ukraine and do some aid work, voluntary work. And last month I was in this monastery in Wales, volunteering. In March, I was working in Romania on this book, obviously for no money. And obviously there's no money in books. I mean, well, there is if you hit it big, but it's like any arts, you know, most people just do it because they love doing it. And I feel like I want to say something. I want to share my ideas and perspectives.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
Thank you very much. You have inadvertently anticipated the next question, which was going to be about your next project.
Okay.
And so you've already talking to us about it's not the 12 works of the 12, you know, works of Hercules. It's the 12 works of Rupert. And you've already told us about the plans for this book to hopefully have it translated into Romanian and published. So I'm going to, although you've already given us a book, I'm going to press you hard and ask for another. This whole project is about recommending books about Romania to other people, to help us learn and discover new books, and to help others hopefully discover Romania, which is one of the reasons we make an effort to include non-Romanian speakers into the project, to partly to get that perspective and that experience, and partly to open up Romania to those who would not have access to the text that hadn't been translated. So my last question is, other than the book that we've spoken about earlier in a travel guide about Romania, is there another book that you would recommend for our Carteadevineri project?
Ooh, about Romania, you mean?
About Romania, or written by Romanian. It has to be it has to have some connection to Romania.
Yeah. Well, I think the oh yeah, I know a great one that's just been published. The History of Mama Liga.
That's actually one of the next ones that is on the recommendation pile. But yeah,
Really,
you're
on
right.
the hit list.
It's really great. And then obviously the books by Carteadevineri are amazing, but I'm not actually sure if they're in English at all. I've read a few in Romanian, and who's that guy from Târgu Neamț, who writes those amazing kids books?
You're talking about
Ion Cranga.
Cranga.
And again, I don't know if they're in English, but I've read some of them in Romanian, and think they're incredible. And the plays of the guy that went to France. Oh God.
Eugen Ionescu.
Cool.
Yeah, Eugen Ionescu. They're amazing too, but I'm not sure he's considered French, even though he's Romanian. So those are the things I'd mention. Kind of more classic stuff.
Of course, I'm gonna have to love you forever, because you mentioned Caragiale, and Caragiale comes from my native town
of
more or less.
Which is what?
Ploiești. He's coming from the south, so there's very few people coming from the south, but yeah.
Oh, and then that did I mention Journal by Sebastian?
My favorite.
Yeah,
that has been translated. That has definitely been translated. Yeah.
but I haven't read that much Romanian stuff, to be honest. I mean, I'm a bit picky what I read. It's like I don't read, even though I consider myself a travel writer and I consider this a travel book / memoir, I don't really like reading most travel books because I just find them a bit self-indulgent. But there are some great ones like Bruce Chatwin and some other ones I mentioned, but generally I'm not really into travel books.
Fair enough. If you haven't come across it or haven't considered reading, I would recommend Elie Wiesel, Night. Elie Wiesel, who's a Romanian Jew.
Oh, Elie Wiesel, right, yeah.
So if you're going into Ukraine, probably a good parallel between what's happening in Ukraine now and what he's written in the past as well.
And then there's another, I remember one of the most amazing books I've ever read was by that guy who lived on the Romanian-Bulgarian border, like Elias Caneti, you know?
Caneti, yeah.
That one, Auto da Fe, is one of those books from the 30s, I think. It's just incredible. And I really like that kind of interwar German-style novel books. But I think some of the great stuff was written back then.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time, Rupert, and hopefully you had a good time yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Very interesting to meet you both.
We are going to, I think, place the link of the book in the comments, so it's easily and accessible to everybody. And thank you all for following us. Looking forward to speaking to you again.
I'd just like to say one last thing. If anybody has any feedback for me about anything I wrote in the book or didn't write in the book, please, I'm always very keen to get feedback and see what people think about whatever I wrote or said.
Sounds fantastic. So we'll make sure that we'll also put a link to your profile in the comments so that people can contact you directly.
Okay. Great speaking to you.
Excellent.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.